Welcome to Tales by Tochi. Please don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. In the heart of Enugu, where the sun dipped golden over red soil and laughter danced through the narrow alleyways of old bungalows, two women shared a bond forged in childhood and sealed in womanhood. Ifeoma and Ruth were more than best friends, they were soul sisters. They had grown up on the same street, eaten from the same pot, worn each other's clothes, and even taken the same beatings from each other's mothers. Their bond was so unbreakable that many whispered it was stronger than blood. And fate, it seemed, agreed. One warm afternoon, as rain clouds teased the horizon, Ruth came rushing into Ifeoma's tailoring shop with tears in her eyes. Ifeoma, alarmed, dropped her measuring tape. But when Ruth blurted out, "I'm pregnant," laughter burst between them like fireworks. Moments later, Ifeoma took Ruth's hand and whispered, "Me too." They laughed until they cried, embracing each other in disbelief. What were the odds? It was as though their wombs had made an agreement in secret. As the months passed, their bond grew deeper. They shared morning sickness stories, cravings, and baby name ideas. Their husbands, Emeka and Chijioke, who had been longtime acquaintances, grew close out of necessity and convenience. Their homes became each other's homes. They accompanied one another to antenatal visits, and when Ifeoma was placed on bed rest in her 8th month, Ruth practically moved into her house. In those moments they would lie side by side, holding hands over swollen bellies and speaking into the future. One day, while sitting beneath a mango tree, they whispered a sacred vow. "If God gives us a boy and a girl, we will raise them to marry each other. Our friendship will live on through their love." They laughed as they said it, but their eyes held serious promise. "They will be best friends like us," Ifeoma added. "No," Ruth corrected, "even better." That day the sun peeked from the clouds as if in agreement. A bond was forged, not just between women but between generations yet unborn. On a rainy Thursday evening, both women went into labor, one shortly after the other. The same midwife helped deliver both babies in a small maternity clinic nestled beside an old Anglican church. Ruth gave birth to a strong baby boy, who let out a fierce cry before being placed in her arms. They named him Chuka, God is supreme. Hours later, Ifeoma delivered a baby girl with bright eyes and a soft coo. They named her Adaora, daughter of the people. As the two babies lay side by side in their shared cradle, their mothers exchanged knowing looks. In their hearts, the vow was renewed. "Look at them," Ruth whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "They already know each other." Ifeoma nodded, brushing Adaora's hair gently. "One day they'll thank us." That night, two mothers held on to hope, two fathers beamed with pride, and two babies unknowingly began a story that would be tested by time, fate, heartbreak, and the harshest storms of life. From the moment they could crawl, Chuka and Adaora were inseparable, their tiny footsteps echoing through each other's homes as though they belonged to both. They played under the mango tree where their mothers had once made that sacred vow. As toddlers, they would hold hands, babbling in the purest language of affection. Ruth would chuckle, watching Adaora lean against Chuka during nap time, while Ifeoma often found Chuka sneaking a piece of his biscuit into Adaora's mouth when he thought no one was watching. As they grew older, they began to mirror each other's mannerisms. If Chuka liked football, so did Adaora. If Adaora started singing, Chuka would hum along even off-key. The neighborhood teased them sweetly, calling them husband and wife, and though they didn't understand what that meant, they enjoyed the attention. Their birthdays, though just hours apart, were celebrated on the same day every year with joint cakes and party games that usually ended with them blowing out candles together while their parents looked on, smiling with unspoken understanding. As the years passed, their connection deepened. In school, they sat side by side and held each other's hands during tests, not caring about the scolding they received. On the playground, Chuka defended Adaora fiercely against bullies, even getting into trouble once for throwing sand at an older boy who called her names. When Adaora caught chickenpox, Chuka cried for days and even faked a fever so he could visit her. Ruth and Ifeoma began to notice how naturally their children protected and cherished each other. Though the vow had not yet been revealed to them, it was almost as if the children already knew they were bound for something deeper than friendship. Emeka and Chijioke would often share knowing glances too, as if watching destiny unfold with their own eyes. They all agreed to let things flow naturally, never forcing anything, but secretly, their hearts nurtured hope. With every year that passed, the seed of that vow grew quietly, watered by shared laughter, mischief, and a childhood shaped by unity and love. But time has a cruel way of testing things forged in innocence. Just after their 10th birthday, A sudden blow shook their world. Ifeoma's husband, Chijioke, was involved in a fatal accident on his way back from work. A trailer lost its brakes and collided with his car, leaving nothing but crumpled metal and unanswered questions. The grief shattered Ifeoma. As if losing her husband wasn't enough, she soon discovered he had taken loans to keep their home afloat, debts she had no way of paying. Everything spiraled. Their home was seized, her sewing machines were sold, and even Adaora's school fees became unaffordable. With no other option, she took her daughter and moved to another city where she had distant relatives who could offer shelter. They left one early morning without a chance to say goodbye. Chuka waited at the park bench they always met at, holding her favorite blue ribbon. But she never came. That night, for the first time in his life, he cried himself to sleep without her. The silence that followed Adaora's disappearance carved a permanent void in Chuka's heart. He returned to the park bench for weeks, hoping she would reappear. Each day he brought her favorite snacks, Chin Chin and Puff Puff from Mama Ngozi's kiosk, and sat with his backpack open, pretending he was studying when really he was just waiting. But time moved on even when his heart refused to. Eventually he stopped showing up at the park. He deleted her number when it no longer connected, tore out the pages of their shared doodle notebook, and packed away the tiny teddy bear she had once given him. But forgetting her was impossible. Her laughter lived in his memories like music on repeat. Her absence taught him loneliness in a way nothing else ever had. Ruth tried to comfort him, but she never told him about the vow. She feared it would burden him or that it might make things worse. Instead, she prayed, for Adaora, for Ifeoma, and for the vow to be fulfilled in God's time. Chuka's grief eventually became fuel. He dove headfirst into academics, excelling beyond expectations. Every award, every science fair medal, and every school recognition was silently dedicated to the girl with the bright eyes who once called him her knight. When he graduated as the best student in his secondary school, he glanced up at the crowd, secretly wishing she was there. University followed, and so did the pressure of success. He built an app in his third year that gained global traction, a platform that allowed remote African artisans to sell their goods globally. The money rolled in and he reinvested it wisely. By his late 20s, Chuka was not only one of Nigeria's most celebrated young billionaires but had expanded into international real estate, tech, and philanthropy. He had fame, power, and influence, but still, a hole remained. He dated women, of course. Models, influencers, even the daughter of a senator. But no one ever matched her. Adaora remained a ghost in his success story, the one person he had everything to give to but nowhere to find. Back in the smaller city, Adaora had grown into a woman shaped by struggle. Ifeoma never remarried, pouring her energy into raising her daughter and surviving. Adaora helped sell bread at junctions, worked at salons, and eventually became a cleaner at a high-end hotel to support her mother. Though she remembered Chuka, she never tried to reconnect. In her mind, someone like him had probably moved on, maybe even forgotten her entirely. She kept her memories locked in an old box under her bed, including the photograph of them at their 8th birthday party and the ribbon he once tied in her hair. Her mother still spoke of Ruth and how they had made a vow, but Adaora always laughed it off. "Those were childish dreams, Mama," she would say. But in her heart, she still prayed that someday life would make sense. That love, real love, would find her again. Chuka's latest business venture took him to Port Harcourt, where he was finalizing the purchase of a luxury hotel chain. It was supposed to be routine: review the books, meet with management, and sign the documents. But that week had been particularly heavy. A friend betrayed him in a business deal, and his usual self-control had thinned to threads. One evening, after dinner in the hotel restaurant, he decided to take a quiet walk through the building. That's when he noticed her. She wore a modest cleaner's uniform, her curves tucked into the plain blue fabric, her hair tied back with a familiar blue ribbon. For a second, something stirred in him, a strange pull, a sense that he knew her from somewhere. But he brushed it off. He had seen too many beautiful women to let a hotel cleaner distract him. Still, her eyes lingered in his mind long after she passed by. He asked for a bottle of red wine to be sent to his suite and sat by the window, his mind spiraling with unresolved emotions. Later that night, their paths crossed again. She was cleaning the hallway near his room when he stepped out to ask for more towels. Their eyes met, longer this time. She hesitated but handed him the towels, her fingers brushing his. Something in her touch unnerved him. She started to walk away, but he called her back. They talked briefly. He asked where she was from. She answered simply, avoiding eye contact. The conversation turned shallow, but the attraction became undeniable. Fueled by wine, loneliness, and curiosity, He invited her in. She hesitated at first, but something in her, maybe a hidden longing or faded hope, made her follow. What happened next was a blur. It wasn't violent or forced. In fact, it was gentle. But it wasn't love either. It was two broken souls colliding in the wrong moment. When he awoke the next morning, she was already dressed and quiet. She thanked him and left. He never asked for her name. She never offered it. In his mind, it was just a one-night lapse. Weeks later, Aora discovered she was pregnant. Shock gripped her. Fear followed. She debated for days whether to keep the baby or not. Finally, she chose life. Her mother supported her decision but warned her that things would become harder. Aora didn't care. She believed every child was a blessing, even if the father didn't agree. She tried to reach out to him, found his email, sent a letter, even visited the hotel with hopes of bumping into him again. Finally, she showed up at his company's Lagos office after months of trying, hoping to at least tell him the truth. When Chuka saw her in the reception area and recognized her as the hotel cleaner, his face hardened. "Security," he called coldly. "Get this woman out of here." Her pleas fell on deaf ears. Her voice cracked, her knees buckled, but his pride and fear shielded his heart. She left the building in tears, more broken than she had ever been in her life, carrying not just a child but a wound deeper than memory. Aora sat alone in their dimly lit one-room apartment, her hand trembling as she held the pregnancy test kit. Two bold lines stared back at her. The dull hum of a ceiling fan overhead did nothing to cool the heat flushing her skin. She blinked slowly, unsure whether to cry or laugh. She had always wanted a child someday, but not like this, not alone, not without love. Her mother, Ifeoma, noticed her silence when she returned from church that evening. Aora couldn't hold back the tears and broke down, collapsing into her mother's arms. Between sobs, she whispered the truth. At first, Ifeoma didn't speak. Her face was still, her eyes stormy. But after a few minutes, she held Aora close, whispering, "We will survive this." It wasn't judgment that filled her heart, it was fear. Fear of what this child would mean for her daughter. Fear of how a man with so much power could turn his back so ruthlessly on a girl he once loved unknowingly. Aora knew she had to try one more time. She couldn't raise a child under so much uncertainty, not without at least confronting him with the truth. She wrote a long letter, pouring out her pain, the truth of her condition, and even reminded him, vaguely, of their childhood memories. She didn't dare sign her full name, still unsure whether he'd connect the dots. She mailed it to the corporate office listed on his company's website. No response. She tried calling his customer line, only to be bounced around like a stranger. Then one Saturday she scraped up transport fare to Lagos, carrying the letter, a scan result, and the last picture she had of them as children. Two kids holding hands beside a birthday cake. She wore a plain dress and old shoes, hoping humility would break the walls. But when she arrived, the receptionist looked her over with disdain. The moment Chuka saw her on the security screen, he snapped. In a voice cold and detached, he ordered, "Get her out of here." When security approached, she raised her voice, pleading, "Please, I just want to talk to him. It's important." But they dragged her out as if she were a pest, tossing her letter into a bin she watched helplessly. The glass doors closed behind her like a final judgment. It wasn't just rejection, it was humiliation. 4 days afterward, Aora barely ate. Her mother tried to comfort her, but Aora sat by the window every night, staring into the sky, her hand resting on her belly. "Why me?" she whispered into the dark. "Why would God let me find him like that, and lose him like this?" But slowly resolve began to rise within her like dawn after a long night. Ifeoma encouraged her not to let the man's rejection define her child. "We are strong women, my daughter. We have always survived. This child will be loved," she said, brushing at Aora's hair gently. Aora nodded, her heart still bleeding, but her spirit refusing to die. She went back to her cleaning job, hiding her growing bump beneath oversized gowns. Every day was a battle between shame and strength, fear and faith. Yet with each passing month, the thought of the baby gave her purpose. She whispered to her belly, "You will never feel unwanted. Even if your father didn't want us, I will give you the world." 3 months after being publicly humiliated at Chuka's office, Aora's belly was beginning to show, and the shame that came with it grew heavier with every glance people gave her. Even in her uniform at the hotel, she could feel the whispers behind her back. Management gave her warning looks, fearing how guests might respond. But Aora kept working, holding her head high, refusing to bow to circumstances. At night, she massaged her swollen feet and prayed, not just for her child but for peace. Meanwhile, Chuka sat in his high-rise penthouse suite, completely unaware of the depth of what he had done. He remembered the girl vaguely now and then, mostly as a mistake, a foolish lapse in judgment he wanted to forget. What he didn't know was that every time Adaora whispered to her unborn child, "You will know love," she was undoing a part of the curse his rejection could have placed on that child's destiny. But fate has its own way of dragging you back to the things you try to bury. Chuka's assistant, Ngozi, found the discarded letter weeks later while clearing out old mail. Curious, she opened it. Her eyes widened as she read the raw words, the desperation, the mention of a shared childhood. Something didn't sit right. Ngozi took the letter home and read it again. The photo inside, of two children side by side, haunted her. The boy in the photo looked exactly like young Chuka. She debated telling him, but knowing how guarded he was, she hesitated. Eventually she tucked it away in her drawer, not knowing what to do. Meanwhile, Adaora continued to write, one email a week. Never aggressive, never begging for money. Just updates, the baby kicked today, we heard his heartbeat, he's due in March. All unanswered. But her dignity remained intact. Ifeoma often watched her daughter and marveled at her strength. "You are stronger than I ever was," she whispered one night. "Even in pain you are still hope." The closer Adaora came to delivery, the more she realized she needed to let go. It wasn't that she no longer wanted Chuka to know, it was that she finally accepted that he didn't want to know. And maybe that was okay. Maybe love wasn't just what was given, maybe love was what you chose to give even when it wasn't returned. She bought used baby clothes from the second-hand market and sewed patches on them herself. She saved enough money for a small crib made of worn wood, which Ifeoma helped her clean and polish. Together they prepared for the child, not with money but with faith. And when the day came, Adaora gave birth to a healthy baby boy with Chuka's eyes and her smile. She named him Obinna, Father's Heart, not to honor the man but to honor the hope that one day, the child would grow up to be a better man than the one who rejected him. It was a humid afternoon, and the streets of the market buzzed with the usual chaos. Traders shouting prices, Okada riders weaving recklessly through foot traffic, and gospel music blaring from tin speakers on the corners. Ifeoma had gone out to buy vegetables and medicine for Adaora, whose body was still recovering from childbirth. As she walked down a quieter alley near the pharmacy, 3 teenage boys emerged from behind a kiosk. Their eyes were wild, desperate. One of them pointed at her bag. "Mama, give us everything now." Ifeoma froze. She tried to plead, "I have nothing, please." But before she could finish, one of them slapped her hard across the face. Her knees buckled. They grabbed her bag, yanked her earrings, and one even kicked her stomach. She fell, her head hitting the pavement. Then everything went black. Passers-by screamed, but by the time anyone got close, the boys had fled. Blood pooled beneath her head as her body trembled slightly, then fell still. At that very moment, Chuka had just stepped out of a nearby boutique where he was reviewing potential real estate locations. His car was parked a few meters away when he noticed the commotion. Driven by instinct, he ran toward the crowd. Pushing through the onlookers, his heart stopped at the sight of the bleeding woman. He didn't recognize her face, time and suffering had changed her. But something in her reminded him of someone. Without hesitation, he shouted at his driver to bring the car. He carried the unconscious woman into his SUV, barking orders at the hospital as they sped through traffic. Doctors rushed her in. He paid cash up front, telling them to do everything necessary. He waited outside the ICU for hours, ignoring calls, pacing. It wasn't charity, it was something deeper. Something about the woman tugged at a place in him he didn't even know still existed. By nightfall, the woman was stabilized but still unconscious. Chuka left quietly after instructing the hospital to call him if her condition changed. When Adaora arrived the next morning and heard how a stranger had saved her mother, she wept. "Who was he?" she asked the nurse. "A tall, wealthy man. Very neat. Looked like one of those CEOs on TV," the nurse replied. Adaora's heart skipped. Could it have been? No, it couldn't. She brushed the thought aside. She stayed by her mother's side, praying and whispering, "Mama, please don't leave me." Meanwhile, Chuka couldn't stop thinking about the woman. There was something familiar, in her eyes, her voice before she slipped into unconsciousness. Something that haunted him. 2 days later, unable to silence the pull, he returned to the hospital. And when he finally walked into the room, the sight that awaited him would change his life forever. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and stale air, but as Chuka stepped into the ward, his mind was drowning in confusion. His heart raced for reasons he couldn't explain. The woman he had rescued still lay unconscious, her face pale against the white pillow. But it was her profile, the curve of her jaw, the faint scar above her brow, that struck a chord deep in his memory. He stepped closer, slowly, cautiously, until he stood beside her bed. Then it hit him like a crashing wave. "Auntie Ifioma?" he whispered, his voice cracking. She hadn't aged gracefully, hardship had carved lines into her once smooth face, but her essence remained. Memories came flooding back. The afternoons under the mango tree, the spicy aroma of her cooking, the way she'd scolded him and ate Aurora with motherly affection. A lump formed in his throat. He reached for her hand, trembling. "I've been looking for you, for both of you, for so long." Just then a nurse walked in and gasped slightly. "Oh, you're back," she said cheerfully. Her daughter hasn't left her side all day. Chuka's brows furrowed. "Her daughter?" he asked, confused. "Yes," the nurse nodded. "She just stepped out to get something. But she's been here nonstop since they brought her in." Chuka turned toward the door, his breath catching. Could it be? The coincidence was too sharp, too specific. Suddenly the door opened, and in walked Aurora. She froze. Her eyes locked on him. His world shifted. For a second, the air between them thickened into something unspeakable. He took a step forward. "Aurora?" he said, barely able to breathe. She blinked rapidly, her bag slipping from her hand. "You," her voice was low, filled with disbelief and rage. "You brought my mother here?" He nodded, guilt painted all over his face. "I didn't know it was her. I saw her being attacked and I helped." The room filled with silence so tense, it pressed on their chests like stones. Aurora stepped closer, shaking. "So now you're a hero?" she hissed, bitterness lacing her voice. "You chase me out of your office like trash, then help my mother like a savior? What kind of twisted game are you playing?" Chuka's lips parted, but no words came. He wanted to say he was sorry. That he didn't know. That he'd been searching for her for years. That her absence had haunted him every night. But the truth had arrived too late, and apologies now sounded like excuses. Aurora looked down at her unconscious mother, then back at him. "You want to help?" she snapped. "Then leave. My mother doesn't need false kindness. And neither do I." With that she turned her back on him. Chuka stood frozen, a man finally confronted by the consequences of his pride. The past had returned, not to comfort him but to remind him of everything he had lost. Aurora sat beside her mother's hospital bed through the night, clutching her hand, eyes rimmed red from unshed tears. Her mind churned violently, trying to make sense of the emotional bomb that had just detonated. How could the man who once meant everything, the man who rejected her, also be the same Chuka from her childhood? How could he be the same boy who had promised to protect her from monsters under the bed, only to become one himself? She remembered his face as a boy, innocent, gentle. She remembered how he used to carry her lunchbox and help tie her shoelaces. And now he had grown into a man who had thrown her into the street like garbage. The betrayal burned deeper now, not because of what he had done recently, but because of what he used to be. She wanted to scream, to cry, to hate him completely. But part of her still clung to those old memories, and that made the pain worse. Chuka, on the other hand, sat in his car outside the hospital, tormented. His head rested against the steering wheel, his eyes shut tightly as he battled his own demons. The woman he had sought for over a decade had been right in front of him, and he had hurt her beyond repair. He remembered their childhood with painful clarity now, the little blue ribbon in her hair, the secret handshakes, the promises they made. How had he not seen it earlier? How had he missed the signs? He was so consumed by success, by maintaining his image, by shutting out the world, that he had shut out the one person who mattered most. Guilt gnawed at him like a hungry beast. How would she ever believe he didn't recognize her? Would she believe he didn't remember her name? Chuka now realized the greatest mistake he had made wasn't rejecting a hotel cleaner. It was rejecting the love of his past, the future they were destined for, and the mother of his child. When Ifioma finally awoke 2 days later, Aurora filled her in gently. The news made her heart race. "Chuka?" she whispered weakly. "My Chuka?" Aurora nodded. "He saved you, Mama. But I told him to leave. He doesn't deserve our gratitude." Ifioma turned her head slowly. "You don't understand," she said. "There's something you must know." She reached under her pillow and pulled out a faded photo, one she had kept in her purse for over 2 decades. It was a picture of 2 babies lying side by side in a hospital crib, their names scribbled on the back. "We made a vow," she whispered. "Ruth and I. That one day, you and Chuka would marry." Aurora's hand flew to her mouth. Her world tilted. Everything, the connection, the longing, the inexplicable pull, made sense now. The truth was like a cruel joke delivered far too late. A vow made in love had become a curse woven through betrayal. The revelation sat in Adeora's chest like a stone she could neither swallow nor throw away. She paced the hospital hallway, tears blurring her vision. The vow explained the feeling she had never understood, the ache that never faded even after years apart. It explained why she still remembered him after so long, why seeing him again had torn her open in a way no ordinary man could. But it didn't erase what he had done. He had humiliated her, dismissed her, abandoned her when she was most vulnerable. Did the past absolve the present? Could a promise made by two mothers justify a pain that still bled? She wasn't sure. She sat on the hospital bench, replaying his words, his expressions. Somewhere deep inside her, the little girl who once loved Chuka wept. But the woman she had become, the woman who had been broken, who had raised a son in silence, that woman was tired of hurting. Chuka returned to the hospital again, despite Adeora's warnings. This time he came with flowers and a handwritten letter. He waited in the hallway for hours until she finally emerged. Their eyes met. No words were exchanged for a while. Then, slowly she walked up to him. "Why?" she asked, her voice low but steady. "Why did you throw me out like that?" Chuka's throat tightened. "I didn't know it was you," he said. "And I was wrong. So wrong. I let pride and assumptions guide me, not love." He handed her the letter, his fingers trembling. "Read this, please. If nothing else, read this." She took it hesitantly. "You broke me, Chuka. I came to you with truth, with a child you helped create. And you threw me away." Chuka nodded slowly. "And I have to live with that. But I want to make it right, for you, for him, for us." His eyes searched hers for the girl he once knew. But she had changed. Life had changed her. Adeora didn't forgive him that day. She walked away, letter in hand, unsure whether it meant anything anymore. That night, she read the letter under the dim light in her room. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't poetic. But it was honest. He spoke of searching for her for years, of longing, of the regret he now carried like a scar. He admitted his arrogance, his failure as a man, and the fear that he had ruined everything beyond repair. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He asked for a chance, just one, to be a father to Obina and perhaps, someday, a man she could love again. As tears rolled down her cheeks, Adeora looked at her sleeping son and whispered, "Maybe, just maybe, he deserves to know who you are." News of Ifeoma's hospitalization reached Ruth through a distant cousin who had spotted Chuka at the hospital. The cousin mentioned how he was constantly visiting an elderly woman who looked frail but familiar. Ruth hadn't seen Ifeoma in over 15 years. After their sudden move and lack of contact, she assumed their paths were severed by time and misfortune. But now, hearing that her old friend was alive and being cared for by her son who had grown into a man she barely recognized, stirred emotions long buried. Ruth remembered the vow. She remembered the mango tree, the giggles, the dream of uniting their families through love. And when she realized that the woman Chuka had been visiting was indeed Ifeoma, and that the girl he had rejected was Adeora, the same Adeora from their shared past, it hit her with the weight of destiny. Without a second thought, she told her driver to take her to the hospital. When Ruth stepped into the hospital room, the air shifted. Ifeoma sat up weakly, and the moment their eyes met, both women broke into sobs. Years of silence, distance, and heartbreak melted as they embraced like two halves made whole. "I thought I lost you," Ruth whispered, her voice cracking. "You didn't," Ifeoma replied softly. "Life just buried us under too much." They spoke for hours about their children, about the vow, and about everything that had gone wrong. Ruth apologized for not searching harder. Ifeoma apologized for vanishing without a trace. But most of all, they cried over how their plan to keep love alive through their children had instead been poisoned by fate. Ruth finally said, "They are meant to be together, Ifeoma. But it's up to them now." Ifeoma nodded. "And God," she added. "Only He can heal what was broken." Ruth promised to speak to Chuka, to remind him of the boy he once was, and the woman he was meant to love. They sealed their reunion with tears, prayers, and a hope that maybe, just maybe, their vow could still come true. Later that day, Ruth met with her son privately at home. Chuka looked tired, his face hollow with remorse. "You saw her?" he asked quietly. Ruth nodded. "She's stronger than you know," she replied. Then she handed him a small envelope. Inside was an old photo, Chuka as a baby beside Adeora, swaddled in the same blanket. He stared at it, his lips trembling. "I remember this," he said. Ruth sat beside him, placing her hand on his. You were born to love her, Chuka. And she you. But you let the world harden you. You let pride speak where your heart should have. Chuka covered his face. I ruined everything, Mama? Ruth shook her head. No. You still have time. But only if you stop chasing redemption with money. You need to earn their trust with your heart. Those words planted a seed in Chuka. A painful, humbling seed. The road to forgiveness was still long. But for the first time in years he wanted to walk it. Even though Ada Ora had not given Chuka a final answer, she allowed him to visit Obinna for the first time, under supervision. When he walked into the small room and saw the boy, his heart stopped. The child had his eyes. The same sharp brow line, the same nose, even the dimple when he smiled in his sleep. Chuka couldn't breathe. He's beautiful, he whispered. Ada Ora stood behind him, her arms folded. Don't fall in love with the idea of being a father if you're not ready to live it, she warned. Chuka turned around. I want to do this right. I want to be there every step of the way. Ada Ora nodded but didn't smile. Then prove it. She handed him a file. Inside was a note. DNA testing appointment. Tuesday, 9 a.m. Chuka blinked. You want me to take a test? She nodded again. Not because I doubt the truth, but because I want you to accept it formally. No excuses. No running. Chuka agreed. It was time to face everything, even legally. On the day of the test, the lab was quiet and sterile. Ada Ora brought Obinna and Chuka arrived early. The procedure was simple, but the tension in the air wasn't. Ada Ora didn't speak much, and Chuka respected her silence. After the samples were collected, they walked outside together for the first time in peace. Why didn't you tell me who you were when we first met again? Chuka asked. Ada Ora exhaled. Because you didn't deserve to know. You weren't the Chuka I once knew. You were a man drunk on power. And I couldn't trust you. Her words stung. But they were true. Do you think I still am that man? He asked. She looked at him for a long moment. I don't know. That depends on what you do next. 2 days later, the DNA results arrived. Chuka was listed as the father with 99.9% certainty. He stared at the paper for minutes, the words blurring through his tears. Obinna, he whispered, you are mine. With the results in hand, Chuka met Ada Ora again. This time at a park they used to play in as children. He handed her the paper. I don't need this to love him, he said. But if it gives you peace, then so be it. Ada Ora scanned the document, then folded it without a word. So what now? She asked. Do you think this fixes everything? Chuka shook his head. No. It doesn't fix what I broke. But I want to build something better, not just for him but for us. If you'll let me. Ada Ora's eyes softened slightly. Being a father isn't about biology, Chuka. It's about presence. Obinna doesn't need your name, he needs your time. Your protection. Your patience. He nodded. Then I'll give him everything. And you too, if you'll have me. She looked away, trying to hide the emotion in her eyes. Forgiveness was a journey, not a moment. But something inside her whispered that the journey might be worth it after all. As Chuka began to step into Obinna's life, his presence stirred both healing and conflict. At first, the boy was shy, unsure of the tall man who brought gifts and watched him like he was fragile gold. But slowly, Chuka's efforts began to warm the child. He took him to school, read bedtime stories when invited, and attended his doctor's appointments. Ada Ora watched from a cautious distance, her guard still firm but her heart softening. Yet not everyone around them welcomed the reunion. News broke online that the billionaire CEO had a child with a hotel maid, and the press spun the story into scandal. Social media exploded with judgment, rumors, and wild speculations. Chuka's board of directors began pressuring him. Investors whispered about moral image and brand damage. And one particularly ruthless board member, Mr. Desmond, demanded paternity confirmation before any more company endorsements were granted. We can't have rumors like this tainting our international expansion, Desmond barked. Chuka slammed his hand on the table. That child is mine. Full stop. But the room remained cold. To silence doubts, Chuka released the DNA results publicly, acknowledging his son and stating his intent to take responsibility, not because of pressure but because of truth. The statement rocked the internet again, but this time public opinion shifted. Many praised him for owning up. Women's rights groups applauded Ada Ora's strength. But the pressure didn't end. Desmond pushed harder, arguing for a vote to reconsider Chuka's leadership due to reputation risks. The battle at work mirrored the war within Chuka's soul. He was fighting for love at home and respect in the boardroom. At one point, Ruth confronted Desmond directly, defending her son's choices and condemning the board's hypocrisy. "If being a father disqualifies him from leadership, then shame on all of you," she said during a heated shareholders' meeting. The tension peaked when Desmond suggested a replacement candidate, someone who could lead without emotional entanglements. But Chuka refused to back down. "If you want a robot to lead you, find one. But if you want a man who stands by his child, then I am that man." Meanwhile, Adaora faced her own storm. Church members whispered, hotel staff gossiped, and friends questioned her choices. Was she using the child to trap a billionaire? Was she truly in love or chasing wealth? She ignored them, focusing on Obinna and work. But the pressure broke her one evening after overhearing two women say she'd sold herself for a surname. She cried that night in her room, clutching her son tightly. "Am I wrong for wanting him to know his father?" she whispered. "Am I wrong to still feel something for the man who broke me?" But Ifeoma, now recovering and stronger, sat beside her and took her hand. "Love doesn't make you weak, Adaora. It makes you courageous. And forgiveness is not for the man who wronged you. It's for the woman who wants peace." Adaora closed her eyes. She wasn't sure she could forgive. But deep down she wanted to, not just for Chuka but for herself. The days grew heavy with emotional warfare, and Adaora's strength began to wane under the weight of it all. Between raising Obinna, dealing with constant public scrutiny, facing whispers from co-workers, and navigating the roller coaster of emotions around Chuka's return, her body started sending warnings. It began with fatigue that she brushed off. Then persistent headaches. Then the nausea returned, not from pregnancy but from sheer exhaustion. But she kept pushing. She went to work each day with a smile she had to force, cooked at night with trembling hands, and stayed up to help Obinna with his homework even when her vision blurred. Ifeoma begged her to rest, but Adaora waved it off. "I'm fine, Mama. Just tired," she insisted. But tired was an understatement. Her body had become a battlefield, worn down by trauma, heartbreak, and silent suffering. Her soul ached, and now her physical body followed suit. Still she didn't stop. Not until she collapsed one rainy afternoon at the market, her body crumpling onto the wet ground beside spilled vegetables. News of her collapse reached Chuka through a panicked call from Ifeoma. His heart stopped. He was at a board meeting, but the moment he heard the words, "Adaora, unconscious, rushed to emergency," he ran out without a second thought. Within minutes he was at the hospital, pacing wildly in the waiting area. Doctors assured him they were doing all they could, but they needed time. Ruth joined him there, her face pale, silently praying. Hours passed like years. When the doctor finally came out with a chart and said the words, "Exhaustion-induced collapse, high blood pressure and signs of severe emotional stress," Chuka's knees almost gave out. "Is she going to be okay?" he asked, voice trembling. "She will recover," the doctor said, "but only if she rests, deeply and for a long time. And if she has less emotional distress. She's been running on pain for too long." Chuka sat down, burying his face in his hands. He felt responsible. He was responsible. The love he had longed for, the woman he had prayed to find, was lying broken because of him. When Chuka was finally allowed to see her, she was asleep. Her face was pale, her breath shallow, her wrist connected to 4 tubes. He sat beside her, held her hand gently and whispered, "I'm so sorry." He told her things he had never said aloud, how he had searched for her, how he never stopped thinking about the girl who used to hold his hand when he was scared of the dark, how much he hated the man he had become. "You didn't deserve what I did to you," he said softly. "You were the only person who ever loved me for me. And I hurt you." His tears fell quietly. Obinna peeked in from the door, holding Ruth's hand. Ruth leaned down and whispered, "That's your daddy, sweetheart. He's here now. And he's not leaving." Adaora stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open for just a second. She saw him, the man who broke her, who saved her mother, who loved their child, and then drifted back into sleep. But in that moment something shifted. A seed of forgiveness took root. Ifeoma knew her daughter well enough to recognize that Adaora's heart was at war with itself. While her body healed, her mind remained entangled in fear. Fear of being hurt again, fear of trusting someone who once walked away. And yet, Ifeoma also saw the way her daughter's eyes softened each time Chuka visited. She saw how Obinna's laughter now filled the house like sunshine, how Chuka sat beside Adaora's bed every evening reading her favorite novels, how he even brought her flowers, not expensive roses but yellow hibiscus, the ones she used to pluck as a child. Ifeoma knew that love was present. But love required courage. So, one morning after Adaora had regained some strength, Ifeoma sat on her bed and held her daughter's hand. "You're not weak for wanting to love again," she said. Adeora turned away, blinking back tears. "But I'm scared, Mama." Ifeoma nodded. "Of course you are. Love is always a risk. But the greater risk is living your whole life wondering what if." She reached into her drawer and pulled out a notebook, old, leather-bound and faded at the edges. "Do you remember this?" she asked. Adeora opened it slowly and gasped. Inside were notes from her childhood, little letters she and Chuka had written to each other, drawings, dreams they shared. "I kept this," Ifeoma said softly, "because I believed in the vow. Not the one I made with Ruth, but the one you and Chuka made in your own way. As children. With your hearts." Adeora traced her fingers across one of the drawings, a crooked house with two stick figures holding hands. Above it, written in clumsy handwriting, was, "Chuka plus Adeora forever." She smiled sadly. "We were kids, Mama." "Yes," Ifeoma agreed. "But sometimes children see the truth clearer than adults ever can. Before pride, pain, and ego cloud the view." Adeora closed the book, tears falling freely. "What if he hurts me again?" she asked. "Then you will rise again," her mother replied. "But this time you won't rise alone. You have a son. And you have me." That night Chuka came again. Adeora was sitting upright for the first time in days. She looked at him, her eyes calm, her posture strong. "I've been thinking," she began. Chuka waited silently, scared to breathe. "I still don't know if I can forgive everything," she continued. "But I see what you're doing. I see how much you've changed. And how much Obinna needs you." She paused. "How much I need you." Chuka stepped closer, heart pounding. "So what does this mean?" he asked gently. Adeora reached for his hand and placed it over her chest. "It means you're not alone anymore. It means I'm willing to try, for him, and for us." Chuka pulled her into a careful embrace, holding her as if afraid she'd disappear. And in that moment, surrounded by scars and second chances, love returned, not in a grand declaration, but in the quiet strength of a woman choosing to believe again. The wedding preparations were subtle at first. Chuka didn't want extravagance. He wanted sincerity. Adeora insisted it be small, quiet, and simple. No media, no guests with cameras, just a few trusted people who had witnessed their journey. Ruth and Ifeoma, hand in hand, worked side by side once again. They chose white and gold for the decor, a nod to purity and royalty, not the kind found in palaces, but the kind forged in pain and forgiveness. Obinna was the happiest. He practiced carrying the rings every day, wearing his little tuxedo around the house like a prince. "I'm the one joining them," he joked one morning, earning laughter from both his grandmothers. Chuka visited every day, bringing food, flowers, even poetry he wrote on hotel stationery. Adeora read each note slowly, allowing the words to wrap around her healing heart. Their love, once broken, now resembled a mosaic, not perfect but more beautiful because of the cracks. One evening, as the wedding approached, Ruth and Ifeoma sat under the same mango tree where it all began. The tree had grown bigger, broader, casting shade over the entire yard. "Do you remember?" Ruth asked, smiling. Ifeoma nodded. "I never forgot." They held hands, their eyes glistening. "We thought the vow was about them," Ruth said. "But it was also about us. About friendship that endures everything." Ifeoma leaned back, looking at the sky. "We lost time. But we never lost purpose." Ruth added, "And now our children are fulfilling what we dreamed, not because we forced it, but because love found its way." As the sun dipped behind the horizon, the two women watched Obinna run through the compound, his laughter echoing into the twilight. And in that moment, everything they had lost, husbands, time, peace, seemed to have returned in a single joyous sound. Their vow had not been in vain. It had simply taken the long road to be fulfilled. On the wedding day, Adeora walked down the aisle in a modest gown sewn by Ifeoma's own hands. The gown wasn't grand, but it held meaning. Each stitch was a prayer, each fold a story. Chuka stood at the altar, dressed in white, his eyes misty. The moment he saw her, his breath caught. She wasn't just the woman he loved, she was the woman he had hurt, lost, found again, and now vowed to cherish. Obinna, standing proudly between them, held the rings as the pastor began the ceremony. "Marriage is not the absence of flaws," he said, "but the presence of grace." And when Chuka took Adeora's hand and said, "I choose you, past, present, and future," even the air seemed to weep. Adeora replied, "And I choose to forgive, to love, and to walk this road with you." As they kissed, Ruth and Ifeoma embraced, tears streaming down their cheeks. The vow made under a mango tree so many years ago had finally become a living, breathing truth. Married life, though wrapped in love, didn't come without its ghosts. The wedding may have sealed their bond, but healing was still a journey. On their first night as husband and wife, Chuka lay beside Adaora in silence for a long time, unsure whether to hold her or give her space. She noticed his hesitation and gently placed her hand over his. "We don't need to be perfect tonight," she whispered. "We just need to be present." They slept wrapped in each other's arms, not in passion but in peace, the kind that comes from surviving a storm together. But over the following days, Chuka struggled with something he hadn't voiced: guilt. No matter how loving Adaora had become, he couldn't silence the voice in his head that reminded him, "You almost destroyed her." Sometimes he would stare at Obinna playing in the living room and feel a lump rise in his throat. He had missed his son's first laugh, his first step, his first word. How could he ever make up for that? Adaora began to notice the change. Chuka was more affectionate than ever, but quieter, as though something inside him was unsettled. She watched him wake up early, sit outside with his head in his hands, or stand silently by Obinna's door at night. One morning as she made breakfast, she approached him from behind and asked, "What's eating you, Chuka?" He shook his head, but she pressed on. "Talk to me. You can't carry it alone." He finally confessed his inner torment. "Every time I look at you or at our son, I see everything I almost lost. I keep asking myself, how did I become that man who turned away from you?" Adaora took his face in her hands. "Because you were broken too. We both were. And we both chose to heal, together." She paused. "But guilt is a chain, Chuka. It doesn't change the past. It only weighs down the future." His eyes brimmed with tears. "I just want to be the father he deserves. The husband you prayed for." She leaned in and kissed him softly. "Then just be here. Be present. That's all we ever needed." The conversation helped, but the process of fully letting go took more than words. Chuka decided to start therapy, a bold move for a man who had built his identity on control and perfection. He began seeing a counselor every week, learning to forgive himself as much as he asked others to forgive him. Meanwhile, Adaora also started journaling again, something she hadn't done since childhood. Her entries were raw, full of pain, triumph, confusion, and hope. Together they created new routines: Sunday family walks, bedtime prayers with Obinna, and weekly story night, where each of them told a tale, sometimes true, sometimes invented. Laughter returned to the house like sunlight filtering through broken shutters. Obinna often said, "This is the happiest house in the world." And though neither parent said it aloud, they knew he was right. The ghosts still lingered, but now they lived in a home where forgiveness was louder than regret. Just as life began to bloom in full again, a challenge arrived that tested everything they had built. Chuka received an offer from a global tech conglomerate to become the youngest African CEO to lead their West African expansion. The opportunity came with immense prestige, power, and financial reward. But there was a catch. The job required relocation to London, immediately for a minimum of 3 years. When Chuka brought the proposal to Adaora, her face darkened. "3 years?" she asked. "Across the ocean?" Chuka nodded, cautiously optimistic. "I thought we could all go. Could be a fresh start for us. New experiences, better education for Obinna, and a chance to change the world." Adaora remained silent. Later that night, she confessed her reservations. "We just started building a life here. I'm finally working at a school, Obinna loves his friends, and Mama is getting better. I'm not ready to uproot all of that." Her voice cracked. "We just found each other, Chuka. Don't make me choose between our love and your ambition." The tension stretched over days. Chuka was torn between his dream and his family's reality. Adaora too wrestled with fear, not just of change but of history repeating itself. "You once chose power over people," she reminded him one night, not in anger but in truth. "I won't stand in your way if this is what you want. But I can't follow you into another chapter where I'm left behind." Chuka sat alone for hours after that, holding Obinna's bedtime drawing, a picture of their house with stick figures labeled Daddy, Mummy, Me. That image pulled at his heart more than any contract could. He walked into their bedroom and said quietly, "I turned down the offer." Adaora looked at him, stunned. "Why?" He stepped closer. "Because I'd rather build a life with you than build an empire without you. What's the point of reaching the world if I lose the two people who are my whole world?" Tears streamed down her face. For the first time in a long while, Adaora didn't just feel loved, she felt chosen. In the weeks that followed, Chuka launched a new local startup instead, one focused on building tech hubs in underprivileged communities. He hired young, brilliant minds and began mentoring boys from slums, many of whom reminded him of who he might have become without Aotearoa. He also invited Aotearoa to speak at conferences, sharing her story of resilience. Together they became symbols of redemption, not because they were perfect but because they had risen from ruin. Chuka's decision to stay proved not to be a loss but a redirection. Investors respected his values and his public image soared. Ruth and Ifeoma often sat together at events, their faces beaming. "He chose her," Ruth whispered once. "Not just in words but in action." And Ifeoma smiled, replying, "That's the vow fulfilled, not in wedding rings but in sacrifices." It was a sunny Saturday afternoon when Chuka took Aotearoa and Obinna back to the place where their story began, their childhood neighborhood. The mango tree still stood tall, now surrounded by newer buildings, but its roots seemed deeper, its branches broader. They spread a picnic blanket beneath it, and Obinna ran around chasing butterflies. Chuka took Aotearoa's hand and said, "This is where we first promised each other forever," without even knowing what it meant. Aotearoa smiled, her eyes misty. "I used to sit right there," she said, pointing, "waiting for you to bring me puff puff after school." They both laughed, lost in nostalgia. "I never forgot you," Chuka whispered. "Even when I didn't remember your name, my heart never let you go." Aotearoa rested her head on his shoulder. "You found your way back. That's what matters." They sat in silence, wrapped in the warmth of memory, watching their son play under the very tree that bore witness to their beginning. Later that evening, Obinna came running up to them with a mango in his hand. "Look, I picked it myself," he said proudly. Chuka ruffled his hair and said, "You're just like your mum, always brave." They laughed, and Aotearoa took a photo of them together, father and son, smiling under golden light. When they got home that night, they framed the photo and placed it on the mantel beside their wedding picture. Above it, Chuka hung a small wooden plaque carved with words he had written. "Some promises take time, but love always keeps them." It became their family's motto. Whenever guests asked about it, Obinna would excitedly tell the story of how his mummy and daddy were best friends since they were babies, and how they got married after a really, really long time out. People would laugh, but some would wipe their eyes too. Because buried in the child's innocent summary was a tale of love, loss, and redemption. As the seasons changed, so did their lives, not with grand events but with gentle, daily moments. Morning prayers, cooking together, weekend visits to the orphanage. Aotearoa became a counselor for single mothers, and Chuka expanded his tech hubs across Nigeria. Yet, no matter how far their work reached, they always returned home, to their roots, their family, their vow. Ifeoma and Ruth often sat outside with tea, watching Obinna play and reflecting on the past. "We made a vow," Ifeoma would say, "and it came true." Ruth would smile and add, "Not because they were perfect, but because love is louder than failure." And as the stars came out each night, above the house filled with laughter, peace, and purpose, one could almost hear the whisper of destiny. What was meant to be, always finds its way. The day Obinna turned 5, the family threw a quiet celebration in the same compound where Ruth and Ifeoma now lived side by side. It wasn't grand, no bouncing castles or celebrity performances, just close friends, a few neighbors, laughter, and a yard filled with the scent of fried rice and roasted chicken. Obinna wore a small crown handmade by Aotearoa, with glitter and the words "Our King" scribbled in blue ink. He danced with his parents, tugged on his grandmother's wrappers, and proudly cut his cake with Chuka guiding his hand. But the true celebration was not about age or party favors. It was about the healing that had taken place in every soul gathered that day. Ifeoma stood watching with tears in her eyes. She remembered the days of hunger, of uncertainty, of watching her daughter sleep beside a cracked window with nothing but dreams to keep her warm. And now here they were, full, grateful, redeemed. Beside her stood Ruth, arm wrapped around her shoulder. "We prayed for this," Ruth said. "And God answered, in His own time." Later that evening, after the last guest had left and the compound quieted, Chuka took Aotearoa for a walk under the stars. The moon cast a soft glow over the yard, and the breeze carried the smell of mangoes from the nearby tree. They walked in silence for a few moments until Chuka stopped near the very bench they had once played on as children. He turned to her and reached into his pocket, pulling out a folded note, worn, faded, and fragile. Aotearoa unfolded it slowly, gasping when she saw what it was. The very first note she had ever written him as a child, drawn with stick figures and a message that said, "When we grow up, I'll marry you." She laughed through her tears. "You kept this?" she asked, stunned. "All these years?" Chuka nodded. "Even when I forgot your name, my heart never let go of this paper. It was my anchor, even when I didn't understand it. He cupped her face gently. I want you to know that loving you was never a mistake. Losing you was my greatest regret. But fighting for you, that's been my greatest redemption. Aotearoa couldn't speak for a moment. She leaned into him and they stood there, hearts pressed together beneath the stars. I forgive you, she whispered. Not because it was easy, but because I want our son to grow up knowing what real love looks like. Love that rises after the fall. Love that chooses again and again. They walked back into the house hand in hand, where Obinna was asleep with his arms wrapped around a teddy bear Chuka had given him the day they reunited. Aotearoa bent to kiss her son's forehead, while Chuka stood in the doorway, his eyes shining. Their home was modest, their past messy, their journey jagged, but it was real. And it was theirs. As they turned off the lights, Aotearoa looked up at the plaque above their mantel. Some promises take time, but love always keeps them. She smiled and whispered to herself, this was always meant to be. And just like that, the story of pain, patience and promise found its final chapter. Not in perfection but in peace. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tales by Tochi for more.